Alright, hi everyone, how's it going? And welcome to another video. Now, a few days ago, Art Bell died. Actually, it was last Saturday, I believe. And I was a big fan of Art Bell, so I thought I would do a tribute video to him because I was a big fan of his show, Coast to Coast AM. And I think quite a few people were. It was a popular show at one point. At one point in time, the show was syndicated on over 500 radio stations at its height. And on any given night, about 15 million people would listen. It would come on typically pretty late at night. Usually around 12. I know in the Chicagoland area, he would be on at around 12 a.m. That's when I would listen. I would usually listen when I was driving home from college, from the college to my house. Usually that would be late at night. And I would listen to Art Bell, and I just loved the topics he had. All kinds of different paranormal topics, all kinds of great guests. Just loved what he had to say, and it was definitely that kind of intellectual excitement I was looking for at the time, because at that time on radio, I don't know, you still kind of had the shock jock thing that was still going on. You still would have, and you still do today, I should say, but you had a lot of right-wing conservative political commentators. So, you know, I thought Art Bell was different. I really did. He would have people on there. Would have all kinds of interesting conversations on paranormal topics. And that was his specialty. But he didn't start out that way. It kind of was a gradual progression, I would say. Something that was very gradual. Just to give you kind of a little bit of background on Art Bell. Art Bell was from North Carolina, born in 1945. And he was like big into like amateur radio as a kid. You know, I believe he had a ham license at a very young age. Then he went into the military during the Vietnam War, where he served as a medic for the Air Force. And he had done that for a while. And my understanding is he even had a pirated radio station at this time. That was another thing that he did. Supposedly it played anti-war music. Then after this, Art Bell would pursue a radio career actually in Okinawa, where he had a radio show, and supposedly he held the Guinness Book of World Records for being on air the longest, 116 hours. He was on the air. So after this, he came back to the States, where he became a rock DJ. He was a rock DJ for several years. Then he got out of radio altogether because I guess he got sick of moving from radio station to radio station. Got out of radio, started a cable company, actually. And eventually people wanted him to get back into radio. He did. He started doing the political radio kind of thing. People weren't really liking it a whole lot. Then he started talking about conspiracy theories and some things about the paranormal. And when he would do that, his ratings would skyrocket. So he decided to just go in that direction because he was already really interested in that stuff. And you could definitely tell he has a strong interest in this stuff. You could tell when someone's really interested in something versus someone who's not really interested in something and just kind of phoning it in. You know, you can tell. You know, you could tell Art Bell was really interested in all the things that he was talking about, all the paranormal stuff. And when he switched over to, you know, the paranormal stuff, that's, like I said, when his ratings skyrocketed. And, yeah, it was all actually broadcast from his house in Pahrump, Nevada. So that's pretty interesting. Yeah, that's where he had it. And Yeah, when he started talking about the paranormal, his ratings, like I said, really shot up. A lot of people would listen to it, and he had a lot of different guests on. It was actually pretty popular amongst truck drivers, from what I understand. But yeah, a lot of different guests, like Stanton Friedman. He would have Zachariah Sitchin, Terrence McKenna, Leonard Nimoy, Dan Aykroyd. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Whitley Strieber. Just a lot of different people who would talk about the paranormal. From what I understand, he was one of the first people to really popularize the physicist Michio Kaku, because Michio Kaku would appear on his show quite a bit. And they would always talk about interesting things. You knew the topics were going to be interesting. I mean, he would have people on, and they would talk about wormholes. They would talk about traveling to other dimensions. They would talk about just all kinds of things. You name it. You know, if it was something in the paranormal, you name it, they would talk about it. And it was usually pretty interesting, and you usually found yourself listening to the whole show, even though you started listening to the show at 12 a.m. You know, you could easily listen to it until 3 or 4, whenever it ended. And, you know, if you had to go to school or work the next day, oh, you were probably going to be feeling it the next day. But it was cool to at least listen to the show the night before and to hear such interesting conversation. I mean, one memorable show I specifically remember was he had this guy on from the Texas Panhandle who was a farmer, and the guy claimed that back in the 70s he shot 2 what he thought were bears, but they turned out, according to him anyways, they turned out to be Bigfeet or Sasquatch, and he said that he buried them and then kept it a secret, and then years later he was revealing his secret on the Art Bell show, talking about how back in the 70s he had shot these Sasquatch, and that he had aerial photos of where it was located. I don't believe those ever surfaced, but from what I understand, I think he was on a few times, but that was definitely one of the more memorable guests, in my opinion. Yeah, I definitely thought of that. There's also another incident where there was this guy he had on. I believe the guy called in. Might have been from a payphone. And the guy claimed he was fleeing Area 51 with some secret information and that government agents were after him. And then I believe the call just abruptly ended. You know, that's another one I specifically remember, and, you know, another interesting one as well. I don't know if they ever found out who the guy was. I think someone eventually claimed to be that caller, but, yeah, I don't know if they ever really got behind it or not, but there were other interesting callers as well. He would frequently have on this guy who claimed to be from the future, and he would tell about all the things that were going to be happening in the near future, and he was very specific. This wasn't like your typical vague kind of person, like there's going to be catastrophe. You know, he wasn't vague like that. This guy was very specific. Yeah, I remember too, he had on, I want to say the guy's last name was Lear. I forgot his first name, but I know he was the son, I believe it was the son of the guy who invented the Learjet. And this guy would talk about, you know, the top secret hidden NASA space program. You know, like claiming there was this hidden secret space program that they didn't want the public to know that was super advanced. They had all kinds of technology, and that they had planted a number of bases on the moon and that, and you know, just a lot of that kind of talk. But I found it interesting. At Art Bell, you could tell, you know, he would always give people a platform to speak. Art Bell didn't always agree with everything people said. He could be skeptical too, but he did like the interesting conversation. He knew a lot of this stuff made for interesting conversation. I mean, for example, even if you don't believe in a lot of conspiracy theories, you do have to admit that there are a lot of conspiracy theories that are fun. And Art Bell recognized that, and he would talk about him, and he would allow people to share their opinions on these conspiracies, give them a platform to speak. And, if he didn't believe in it, he didn't believe it. But he always did show an interest, and you could tell that Art Bell always did his research. He was well read in the paranormal, and he really studied these subjects quite a bit. And like I said, you could tell. It definitely showed. It was the difference between, like I said, someone who is really passionate about it and someone who's just kind of phoning it in. You could tell he loved what he was talking about. Whether or not he believed in it, well, sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. But yeah, it definitely, was a great show. That's why I certainly wanted to talk about it. But another thing I do want to mention is that Art Bell actually did have a number of different retirements. I should talk about that. Like, he would be on the air, then he would retire, then he would come back, then he would retire again. That happened quite a bit. Now, I know one time there was an incident involving his son where he claimed his son might have been kidnapped or something. Don't quote me on this because I don't know all the details. But there was something like that. Then there was another situation where he claimed people were shooting at his house while his show was airing. That people would come by with guns and just shoot at his house. That was another thing. And then he came back again, and then he said that, he was leaving this time because he wanted to move on to other things. And he left for a little bit. Then he came back with a satellite radio show. I think on Sirius XM, I want to say. Something like that. And the show was on for only about 6 weeks, and then it went off. But yeah, he had some interesting stuff on there. Another guest he had, I should mention this, he had Joe Rogan on even. They talked about isolation tanks and DMT, and also the UFC, of course. Kind of like one of Joe Rogan's podcasts in a lot of ways. It was kind of like that. But it was interesting to listen to, if you're not familiar with the things Joe Rogan has to say on isolation tanks and DMT. I don't think Rogan talks about that stuff too much anymore, but at one time he did. But they talked about it quite a bit on the show. But yeah, definitely did want to talk about Art Bell, kind of definitely an interesting guy. It's the fact that he had this radio station in a Nevada town, kind of in the middle of nowhere, although I don't, might be relatively close to Las Vegas. I'm not sure. Like I said, it's Pahrump, Nevada, which interestingly enough, Michael Jackson also lived there. And I guess he was raising his family there because he wanted to live in a place where not a lot of people would know where he was and that kind of thing. But, yeah. So, definitely had a good show, Art Bell. I did want to talk about that because, like I said, I was looking for something that was intellectually exciting to listen to. I didn't want to listen to, your typical run-of-the-mill trash talk show where, because I was just studying and it was late at night. I wanted to, keep my mind going. I wanted to keep my mind on something interesting and something thought-provoking. I didn't want to expose it to, trash entertainment. So, definitely, like I said, liked Art Bell. Definitely had a good show. And you could find shows on YouTube and stuff. There's classic Art Bell, classic episodes you could come across. There's quite a few of them. He was replaced, and I will talk a bit about this. He was replaced by an individual by the name of George Norrie, and well, let me just say I do like the fact that George Norrie at least kind of does continue with the interesting topics. Unfortunately, it seems to me that George Norrie doesn't always really do his research, and I don't like where he takes the conversation sometimes. That's my complaint with George Norrie. Still, the topics are interesting. He still has some interesting guests, and he could have some interesting things to say, but he's no Art Bell. He's really no Art Bell, and supposedly him and Art Bell were not even close, so I don't even know fully how George Norrie got the gig on Coast to Coast AM. I really don't. But, yeah, somehow he did get the gig and has been on it for a number of years now. But you could see him sometimes on the show on the History Channel, Ancient Aliens. He'll appear. But, yeah, just, my opinion, just doesn't have as entertaining a show as Art Bell did. But, yeah, that's all I've got. Just kind of my tribute to Art Bell. If you watch this video, as always, I thank you for watching. Have a good night.